From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and here's what's coming up. A guest speaker on the K-State campus this week. The USDA's Lisa Ainsworth will talk about her research on genetic improvement of major field crops for ozone and carbon dioxide tolerance. Her work is in the early stages, and she'll tell of its importance. Following then, Britton Rucker with this week's highlights from the latest Cattle Chat podcast out of the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State. Brad White, Bob Larson, Dustin Pendell, and Bob Weaber will look at, among other things, the practicality of employing AI in commercial cow breeding. And later this week's horticulture segment, where K-State's Raymond Cloyd will talk about this past winter's effect on lawn and garden insects. That and more ahead on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
You're tuned in to the K-State Radio Network, and glad to have you aboard once again for another Agriculture Today. Each year, the Department of Agronomy here at Kansas State University hosts a scientist from off-campus to talk about their area of research expertise that would be of interest to all agriculture. It's the Elmer G. Heine Crop Science Lectureship. It's named after the longtime wheat breeder at K-State who served on the campus in that capacity for well over 40 years. And presenting the 35th Annual Heine Lecture is an individual who works for the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Agricultural Research Service at its Global Change and Photosynthesis Research Unit out of the University of Illinois. She's mic side now following her lecture, Lisa Ainsworth. Lisa, welcome to K-State, first of all.
Thank you.
Tell us about your background and your research initiative here and why you have shown interest in global climate change and how it relates to crop production.
Well, I grew up in central Illinois in a small farming community, and so I guess my interest in agriculture probably started there. Then I got my bachelor's degree at UCLA in biology and became interested in photosynthesis, which, of course, is the process that gives us the oxygen in our atmosphere and all of the food and the fiber and the feed that we need to survive on the planet. And then I went to the University of Illinois and studied how rising atmospheric carbon dioxide in the atmosphere impacts photosynthesis of a wide range of species. And then when I came back to the University of Illinois and the USDA ARS, I started working mostly on crops and how they respond to atmospheric changes and how we can better adapt crops to the changes in the atmosphere that we're already seeing and that are anticipated for the future.
So what you just said there about crop adaptation to changing climate, is that the thrust of the mission of the Global Change and Photosynthesis Research Unit?
Yes. So our research unit aims to understand the process of photosynthesis in crops and improve that process, as well as to adapt crops to elements of global change that include atmospheric change, like changes in carbon dioxide and ozone pollution, as well as rising temperatures.
Talk a bit more in particular about ozone and its impact on crop productivity and what we know about that today.
Okay, so ozone is an atmospheric pollutant, and most of the ozone in the atmosphere that we hear about in the news is the stratospheric ozone. So that's 15 kilometers above the Earth's surface, where there's a layer of ozone that protects us from UV radiation. And so that's different from the tropospheric ozone, or the ground level ozone, which is impacting crop production. So there, ozone is a pollutant. It's an atmospheric pollutant. And it's a secondary pollutant, meaning it doesn't come out of tailpipes or industrial processes, but it forms from primary pollutants. And ozone concentrations across the globe are probably double what they were before the Industrial Revolution. So ozone's a reactive oxygen species, and it causes oxidative stress in plants and also in humans, and it accelerates the process of senescence and aging. And so in that way, it decreases photosynthesis of crops, and it ultimately decreases their yields. And so my research aims to understand everything from the molecular biology and biochemistry of how ozone impacts plant cells to how yield is impacted. And our work suggests that current ozone concentrations are probably costing around 10% of potential maize yields and about 5% of potential soybean yields across the United States.
So we're talking a significant detriment to yields potentially.
So it's a billion-dollar problem, yeah.
And you mentioned carbon dioxide as another influence on crop productivity that your lab is addressing.
So carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere today are over 400 parts per million, and this is higher than they've been in the last 650,000 years of the Earth, and probably higher than they've been in the last million years of the Earth. And so really plants evolved and were adapted to concentrations of carbon dioxide that are lower than they are today. And so carbon dioxide, of course, is a substrate for the process of photosynthesis, and so adding more CO2 can increase the rates of photosynthesis, and it can improve crop growth and performance. And so we are studying how we can identify lines that can maximize that potential benefit and also minimize the negative side effects. And so one of those side effects is that higher CO2 concentrations decrease the quality of grains, decrease the protein content in the grains. And so are there lines that can produce more but also maintain their quality at high CO2? And that's the sort of work that we're doing.
I want to get into that briefly here. Are some crops more prone to the ill effects of ozone or carbon dioxide than others?
Yes, and certainly there's variation in crop sensitivity to both ozone and also in crop responsiveness to rising CO2. And so for carbon dioxide, there's a big difference between our C3 crops like soybean and wheat and C4 crops like maize and sorghum. So maize and sorghum already concentrate CO2 around the protein rubisco that fixes carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. And so they're less responsive to rising CO2 because they're already concentrating carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. So they kind of have supercharged photosynthesis already. Whereas C3 crops like wheat and soybean directly increase photosynthesis when they're in a high CO2 environment, all else being equal, so not adding temperature stress or drought stress. Yeah. For ozone, we know just a lot less about how ozone impacts crops, but both corn and soybeans seem to be sensitive to ozone. Wheat is also quite sensitive to ozone. And part of it is just that ozone is a very dynamic atmospheric pollutant. So unlike CO2 that's long lived in the atmosphere and there's a long trend of rising CO2, ozone is very dynamic at the troposphere. And so although concentrations have gone up since the industrial times, it's also very dynamic. And so we just understand a lot less about that.
So your research unit is searching for genetic answers for these crops so that they can perform well even under these high ozone, high carbon dioxide conditions. And it's been somewhat limited so far, somewhat an unexplored territory.
Yeah, and so we operate a unique field facility where we can manipulate the atmospheric environment but also grow crops in the field under kind of farm field conditions. And so part of the limitation is just the size of those experimental plots. We use 20-meter octagonal plots to manipulate the atmospheric conditions, and so there's only so many lines that you can fit in those plots. Mm-hmm. For CO2, if you're a breeder and you're interested in drought stress or temperature stress, you can go to regions that are warmer or drier and do your experiments. There aren't regions around the world that have different CO2 concentrations, and so you either have to have a manipulative experiment or hope that by selecting in today's CO2 environment, you're also preparing for tomorrow's environment. For ozone, it's a dynamic pollutant, so having a sort of a clean air or a very polluted environment is kind of hard to predict beforehand. So you're more limited in the way that you can select.
Well, how far along are you and your colleagues then in finding germplasm, genetic traits that can serve the purpose that you're seeking to answer here?
Yeah, I would say we're still at the beginning of this search. And so we certainly have identified some of the genes that are involved in response to CO2 and to ozone. We've identified lines of both corn and soybeans that have differences in their response. We've identified some molecular markers for sensitivity to ozone. But, putting that into a commercial breeding program we're pretty far from that still.
These are the opening phases of the research.
That's right.
In effect.
Mm-hmm.
What would genetically modified organisms bring to the table here, if at all?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I think as we identify some of the mechanisms by which ozone is impacting crops, we can probably target those mechanisms using genetically modified technologies. For rising CO2, perhaps we can target this decrease in quality that you're getting as you increase yields with higher CO2 and also dilute out some of the protein. There may be opportunities there to genetically modify protein content in the seeds so that it remains high, even in an environment with more carbon.
It seems, though, Lisa, that a race is on here, the science with the change in climate, if you will, to get ahead of this. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, drought stress and temperature stress have challenged agriculture since the inception of agriculture, pests and diseases as well. And these atmospheric changes are just a new dynamic. And so there's a real opportunity there, but the atmospheric changes are happening very rapidly. We're adding 3 parts per million of CO2 to the atmosphere every year right now. And so that's a considerable change in the rate of change in the past. And so I would agree with that. So
the answer is probably pretty obvious. Would you like to see a greater sense of urgency in this research arena to advance this kind of work?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. I think that, this is an important problem. And I think that in the context of thinking about the margins of agriculture today and what farmers are facing, being prepared for the future is really important.
We wish you well with all of this as you move forward, and it's great to have you here sharing this information at the Elmer Heine Lecture, and with us as well, Mike's Side today. And thanks for your time, Lisa.
Thank you very much.
She is Lisa Ainsworth, USDA Agricultural Research Service scientist, and she is at the Global Change and Photosynthesis Research Unit based out of the University of Illinois. And she spoke about her work at the aforementioned Elmer Heine Crop Science Lecture here at K-State earlier this week within the Department of Agronomy at the university. We'll be back with more after this. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
We're back with Agriculture Today. This is Britton Rucker. Coming to you from the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State University is another BCI Cattle Chat. Participating in this week's podcast are veterinarians Brad White and Bob Larson. Also joining them are livestock economist Dustin Pendell and cow-calf specialist Bob Weaber. Brad tells us here the topics they'll be focusing on this time around.
On today's episode, we're going to talk about a couple things. We're going to talk about the price of cull cows. We're going to talk about if AI is worth it. One of the questions that we get here coming into this time of year is, what about when we plan for breeding season, what about artificial insemination? And a lot of times we think about artificial insemination as a way to maybe improve our operation, do things differently, but there's also some costs associated with it. And one of the things, Bob, that you explored last year was, we had a question, you went through some work answering the question, is AI worth it?
Yeah.
So for a commercial operation, let me frame it a little bit, not thinking about purebred, not thinking about selling seed stock, but for a commercial operation, is it worth it to AI my cows?
The answer, as you can imagine, is it depends. But we really kind of nailed down what it depends upon. First of all, I would like to maybe separate a little bit in that there are a lot of scenarios where AIing heifers, commercial heifers going back into the herd makes sense. And there's a lot of reasons why that's a little bit easier. a lot of times first of all, they don't have a calf on them. So if we're using a synchronization protocol, we don't have to worry about sorting calves off and that kind of thing. So it just physically works better. You have the added benefit with AIing heifers of picking those low birth weight or high calving ease bulls, which adds a lot of value to AIing heifers. And then I also want to keep heifers that conceive very early in the breeding season anyway. And so by putting the pressure on those heifers that conceive to an AI pregnancy to a calving ease bull, there's just a lot of benefits in a commercial operation to AIing heifers.
Okay, so fair point. Let me rephrase my question then. Let's focus on the cows, the commercial cows in that operation, and we'll pick up heifers and AI in another episode.
So heifers almost always. Cows, not almost always. It really depends.
Yeah, I think one of the big things to think about is really kind of how the cows are already in their calving distribution. And we talk a lot about, Bob, you've spent a lot of time talking about momentum. And I think that's a really valuable component of sort of understanding cow herd reproductive efficiency.
Cows that calve early tend to calve early in subsequent years. Cows that calve late tend to calve late in subsequent years. So that momentum, where she calves has a huge influence. When she calved this year has a huge influence on when she'll calve next year.
Yep. And there is some opportunity with particularly a cedar-based protocol maybe to roll up some of the cows. But if you're only doing it one round of AI and you're trying to target those early cows, a lot of the late calving cows aren't going to be long enough postpartum interval to respond to the synchronization protocol. So without doing multiple rounds of AI to kind of capture those, it becomes a little more challenging. And certainly the more times that you have to process cows, it generates additional labor expense.
We did kind of work through some spreadsheet scenarios and things. And in a commercial herd where you have a high percentage of cows that do calve in the first 21 to 30 days, so a lot of cows calve in that first, I'm talking 80% or so calve in that first 30 days, that's the type of herd that might continue to benefit from having a synchronization protocol. If you've got your cows that tend to, a fair percentage of them calve in that second 21-day period or the third 21-day period, then they're just not far enough past calving to be a good bet for a synchronization protocol because of the cost that I'm adding. I'm adding the cost of synchronization. I'm adding the cost of AI semen.
So if they're spread out, probably not a good plan. But if they're close and they're calving, and you said 80% in the first 30 days of that calving season, what's the advantage then in that case of AI versus just putting in bull power?
One of the advantages is the potential for 2 opportunities to get pregnant in the first 21 days. If you think about a synchronization protocol, let's say not a synchronization protocol, that those cows are going to be evenly spread out over the first 21 days. So if most of my cows will come into heat sometime during the first 21 days, they'll be evenly spread during that time. Whereas if I use a synchronization protocol, most of them will come in heat the first few days of the first 21 days, and then the ones that don't stick to that pregnancy will have another opportunity. So it takes the average opportunity to get pregnant up 7-8 days. So it takes the average calving date the following year, and that's where I'm getting my income back, is more pounds, more so the calves have been alive more days, growing at their 2.25 pounds a day or so, and that's where I'm getting the value back.
Yeah, I think one of the other areas that the AI program on these early calved cows in particular works really well is from a replacement female generation standpoint. So you use gender sort semen, breed a fair number of cows to produce your replacement heifers in a really targeted mating decision.
The gender sorted semen is one that people saw this as a tremendous opportunity many years ago, and it was a long time coming. The technique is getting better and better all the time as far as our fertility is not quite as good as with non-gender sorted semen.
But it's pretty close.
It's getting closer, and the value of getting my heifers out of that first round of AI and then turn in my terminal bulls for the rest of the herd
generates a fair bit of value. You don't have the maternal influence steers you got to deal with, and so it has a lot of advantage that way. So
it's something to think. And so maybe because of the cost and the hassle of doing a synchronization and AI in commercial cows, not been a great uptick in the U.S. industry. But with some of these changes that are occurring, really good synchronization protocols and sex-sorted semen to get my heifers, it's something I think a lot of operations ought to have another look at and see if it might work for them.
And maybe do the math. As you described, what's it going to cost me? How can I do it? And it doesn't have to be wholesale. There may be a subset that you say, this is where I'm going to make some replacement heifers.
I think that's a really good point, in that this being synchronization of commercial cows, it's the cows that calved early. And I don't know that there's enough benefit for those cows that are not a good bet. So those cows that calve after the 30th day of the calving season, they're probably not a great bet. Some of them would synchronize and conceive, but not a high enough percentage of them to offset the cost. So a subset of those early calving cows makes a lot of sense.
Let me pin you down a little bit on, so what are my expectations? I do an AI sync, timed AI program. How many of the cows am I going to get bred through that program?
That's a great question. My ballpark is 50% or a little better in those cows that are good bets. And that's because the synchronization is not 100%, and then my success of the mating is around 65% or so.
We hope for more. I mean, it's not unusual to see operations get into the 60s on a synchronization program. But if you're going to sit down and do the math, don't use the best outcome to base your decision. Use an average outcome, or below average. So 50% is a number I use a lot when I'm sort of figuring out the cost per conception.
Which that's where I was going. Is that makes the math easy. So if you figure 50%, then whatever your AI per cow sync and AI rate per cow is, double it. That's your cost per conception.
Yep.
And hopefully the breeding season goes well. But we know they won't all get bred, and sometimes those cows that don't get bred end up as cull cows, which has taken us to, we've seen some big turns in that marketplace recently, Dustin, as far as last fall to this spring in the cull cows.
Yeah, I think thinking about cull cow prices, there's some underlying supply and demand issues. Was it 2014 was the U.S. cattle herd was at its low? Recent, and then it's been going up ever since, but it's at a much slower rate. And so I think what we saw in 2018 was, a lot of beef cows being slaughtered. In fact, 2018, the total cow slaughter was up 1 million head, which is about 20% above the lowest over 2015. So we've got a lot more beef
supply.
A lot more supply being slaughtered, cows slaughtered. And then the other thing to think about is the dairy. With the dairy prices, we see a lot more cull cow dairy cows being slaughtered. So you got a lot more.
When the dairies aren't making high profits, then they're going to cull pretty hard on those cows and get rid of
cull rates deeper.
Yeah.
Correct. So you got a couple of supply issues. Probably on the demand side, you talk about record pork and poultry. And so now you've got that driving down, or the weaker demand, I guess, for hamburger or for processed cows. And so both supply and demand issues, I think, that were driving the cull cow prices.
We had some of the lowest cull cow prices this past fall that I've seen in a lot of years.
And it's important to manage those cull cows because they represent a percentage of your income.
Yeah, typically it's not uncommon for a quarter to a third of farm income to be driven off of cull animal revenue streams, and so making sure that you sort of manage the value of those cull animals can be in a lot of cases a difference between a ranch being profitable and not. I mean, if you think about if you cut that third in half, if you mismanage the value of those cows in terms of a selling time point, it's a pretty expensive mistake.
Basically, you're saying put as much time into thinking about the marketing and management of the cull animals as you do the steers and heifers coming off the farm.
Yep. In many years, if you look at the cull cow feeding enterprise and moving cows out of a October-November marketing window into a February or March marketing window,
are starting to come up.
You've not only increased the weight of those cows typically, and they gain really well on low-quality feed and some protein, but you also roll up the value of them. Right?
And that's what you said. I mean, the price of cull cows from last fall to now has increased.
Yeah, and I think they were at about $60 back in late February. And what I read was they're thinking that the 2019 cull cow will kind of follow similar the seasonal patterns in 2019 as it has in the past, excluding 2018.
Yeah. So I think that's an area, do the math and make sure, but don't forget about it because it's a significant chunk of your income. We spend a lot of time managing calves, but the culls are important.
From the Beef Cattle Institute, that was Brad White, Bob Larson, Dustin Pendell, and Bob Weaber. Be sure to hear the entire podcast at beefcattleinstitute.org. Again, that is beefcattleinstitute.org. For Agriculture Today, this is Britton Rucker, and we'll be back with more after this break over the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today is back now here on the K-State Radio Network. Once more, glad to have you aboard. Eric Atkinson here. Today's agricultural news headlines coming your way now, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, as rural communities in Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, and Kansas continue to battle floodwaters and continue the recovery efforts, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is forecasting an increase in water releases at Gavins Point Dam in South Dakota. The Corps reported in a news release yesterday that March runoff in the upper basin north of Sioux City, Iowa, hit a record 11 million acre-feet. That surpassed the previous record of 7.3 million acre-feet back in 1952. Currently, Gavins Point releases are at about 39,000 cubic feet per second. Releases are forecast to increase to 55,000 cubic feet per second early next week. Gavins Point releases will be above average for the next several months and possibly as late as November, according to the Corps in its news release. And the Corps said about 56% of the flood control storage in the basin is available to store runoff this spring and summer. The Corps' calendar year runoff forecast is expected to be 151% of average. Now, 3 governors said yesterday that something has to change about the Corps' management of the Missouri River, though they acknowledged they don't know exactly what that change would look like. After meeting with Corps officials about levee repairs and the recovery phase from the ongoing flooding, the governors of Iowa, Missouri, and Nebraska all said their states have to take more ownership over how dams and levees are managed along the rivers. They relayed that message to the Corps, according to Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds. Nebraska Governor Pete Ricketts said the governors asked the Corps of Engineers about options to change management, up to the point of asking Congress to change laws to focus more resources on flood prevention. Nebraska and Iowa are each looking at more than $1 billion to $1.5 billion in economic damage, roughly, with communities flooded, extensive crop and livestock losses, as well as roads and bridges that could take years to fully rebuild. Missouri farmers have not tallied their damages as of yet, but parts of northwest Missouri are still underwater, and farmers in all 3 states are facing millions of dollars in losses in grain bins that could be uncompensated without a disaster package, and a significant number of those farmers won't be able to get a crop in the ground this spring. This is something that Ricketts says has to be thought about, and the states, he says, need to be more actively involved in how the Missouri is managed to avoid this sort of flooding going forward into the future. Missouri Governor Mike Parson said there have been meetings with the Corps for far too long that end with the same result, he says. Quoting him, "It's time we need some straight-up answers from the Corps of Engineers about how they are managing the river and why we continue to have these situations and are getting worse." Parson said the economics of all 3 states are totally dependent on the management of the river. Now, the governors did note that Kansas Governor Laura Kelly wanted to attend yesterday's meeting in Council Bluffs, but could not make it because of travel issues. Meantime, USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue says his department is using every program available to help producers hit by floods and other disasters, but he says lawmakers still need to pass that disaster bill. More on that from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
It's time to put politics aside and provide relief.
Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue telling reporters outside USDA headquarters that the recent Midwest flooding just adds more weight to the need for a special disaster bill, and he urged lawmakers to
come together with a disaster relief bill for our agricultural people in Florida, Georgia, Carolina, the Midwest with the floods and the wildfires. This is no different than 2017 with the hurricanes. It's unfortunate, frankly, that it didn't get done earlier in the appropriations bill, so we are strong advocates.
Many farmers lost stored grain to the floodwaters.
This is not covered by crop insurance. This is a loss and a devastating loss for those producers.
And Perdue said he hopes any new disaster package will include help for those producers. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
And you're tuned to Agriculture Today. Time now for the latest Kansas soybean update. And with that, as always, is Greg Akagi. Greg?
Charlene Patton, Consumer Media Specialist with the Kansas Soybean Commission, joins us. Charlene, the month of April is celebrated as National Soy Foods Month.
We're excited to bring a new soy foods guide to consumers across the state. It has 32 pages of 4-color information and recipes and all the latest health information to encourage consumers to add soy as part of a healthy diet. One of the pages here includes 8 reasons why soy is spectacular for your health. So if anyone's wanting to know those reasons why to include soy, it includes a wonderful guide to help consumers make those choices. We're trying to make it easy for consumers to include soy in their diet. They can go to kansassoybeans.org. We have an archive of many, many recipes, and they're all tailor-made to whether you're looking for a baking recipe or looking for a salad or soup recipe, to really make it easy for consumers. And of course, with the soybean industry right now, we have lots of choices in the grocery store. No longer is it just soy milk, but we have the soy nut butter, we have edamame, we have black beans and yellow soybeans that make it easy for consumers to add them into recipes that they're already making.
You talked about baking. Doing substituting on some of the normal things you may use has become very much something that people can do.
And with the soy flour, we encourage consumers to combine that, for the most part, with our good Kansas wheat flour, because soy flour does not include gluten, and we need gluten for most of our baking. We do have recipes on our website, and we also have an opportunity for consumers to blend it in their flour canister using a 7-to-1 ratio. And that way they use 7 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 cup of soy flour, sift that together, and you can use that for any baking that you're doing and add that soy protein to your diet.
There are myths out there about how people look at soybeans or taking soybeans in some form or fashion. I know myth and fact are 2 different things.
And the Soy Foods Guide will really actually help with that. They can call our 800 number to get a copy of that, but it lists some of the target reasons to include soy in your diet and then gives some of the factual information behind that to help consumers make those choices.
That is Charlene Patton, Consumer Media Specialist with the Kansas Soybean Commission. She joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Greg Akagi there. Thanks, Greg. Remember to listen to Agriculture Today anytime you choose. Visit agtoday.net, where you can listen on demand and you can find links to subscribe to the podcast via Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and Spotify. agtoday.net. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
This Agriculture Today concludes with our weekly K-State Horticulture segment, and we've brought back by, to open up another growing season, if you will, horticultural entomologist Raymond Cloyd of K-State Research and Extension. He's been on something of a hiatus because during the winter the insect activity in lawn and garden is fairly minimal, but we're back into spring now, Raymond, and so we're expecting insects to start popping. And wanted to ask you initially here about our rather harsh winter weather and whether that had a suppressing impact on insects out there.
That's a great question, Eric. We've been getting it several times during the winter, and the answer is probably minimal, if any. And let me explain why. Insects were here before us, they'll be here after us, and they have evolved mechanisms to survive winters, whatever you call a winter. For example, some of them will overwinter as eggs, larvae, pupa, and adults, and that allows them to survive. They also have 2 mechanisms. One of them is freeze avoidance, and that is where they go in places to hide. And one of the examples is Asian ladybird beetle coming here, box elder bug. These are insects that go in your home. There are others that will be in like the bark of a tree, and those that will be in the soil. And so that's what we call freeze avoidance. Now, the other is called freeze tolerance, and that's when the insects excrete all the water out of their system, because as water freezes, it expands, and they have their own little glycerol that allows them, antifreeze, to survive winter times. And so I gave a talk Saturday on Japanese beetle, and somebody asked me, what type of winter does it take to impact insects and mites? It says it takes about 2 weeks of temperatures below negative 10 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit to have an impact. And so we haven't had that in a long time.
It was a tough winter, but not that.
No, not that tough, exactly. The other is snow cover. We had a lot of snow, and those insects that overwinter in the soil, like Japanese beetles and others, that provides insulation. For example, if the ambient air temperature was, say, 10 degrees, the soil temperature could be 50 degrees Fahrenheit, because the snow acts as insulation. So, again, the insects do have these mechanisms they've evolved with to overcome harsh winter conditions.
So, in the main, homeowners, gardeners can expect the usual flush of insects in this growing season ahead.
Right. Now, what will really be interesting, what does impact, let's say, when we will get insects and their abundance, is the spring times. If it's dry, cool, then it will delay it. If we get rain, that'll exacerbate it, because plants will be coming out, and of course the herbivores, those that feed on plants, will be there when the leaves come out for their food source, basically. Yeah. So springtime temperatures and rainfall levels will be really an important factor what our potential insect and mite pest populations, and that does include just the bad ones. The good ones are there too. They also survive. So the natural regulatory processes they provide are also important.
So, Raymond, if you were to speculate, what would be the likely first prominent lawn or garden insect problem we'll see in Kansas this year?
Well, Eric, I know that the eastern tent caterpillar is really early in April. The ash lilac borer will be out in April. But again, it depends on temperature. And, when Van Hoot spirea is blooming, then we know, which is one of our plant indicator plants, we know that ash lilac borer, European pine sawfly, and some other insects will be present. But eastern tent caterpillar is the one that creates those nests, or we call them nests, in the crotches of things, cherry, plum trees like that you see on the roadside. So that's one of our earliest defoliators, because they actually start building their nests sometimes even before the trees are budding out and leafing. But as soon as they do leaf out, they're there munching away at the leaves.
Now that's one where an individual can mechanically deal with that pest.
Well, we generally recommend if you can disrupt the nest, open it up, then the birds will go in there and eat them. These caterpillars are very fat, so there's a pretty good morsel. Sometimes it doesn't really require spraying, just disrupting that nest and allowing any types of predators, birds, other vertebrates to chew on and eat on those caterpillars, yeah.
That's the simplest and most cost-effective way of dealing with the eastern tent caterpillar. You say that Asian lady beetles will get after it fairly soon as well?
Right. Now, remember, the Asian lady beetle is one of those that comes into the homes to overwinter, because in China there's cliffs, and Kansas is a little short on the cliffs, but the homes will be a good substitute. So right now they've used it probably most of their reserves through metabolism, and they're really, I'll quote, itching to get out and look for some food as the temperatures increase and the plants have leaves, and then we have things like aphids, which is one of our another early herbivore feeding, and that's what they primarily feed upon. So what we recommend is just sort of vacuum them up and then put them outside, and they're very good predators. The problem is they're a nuisance when they come in the home in the fall.
Right. But as far as their impact on landscape plants and or garden plants, should one need to contend with the Asian lady beetle at all?
No, Eric. These are predators. They primarily feed on pest insects and mites, yeah.
And you mentioned the ash lilac borer. Anything to do about it at this point of the season?
Well, at this point you can wait, but if you have a history of a lilac or ash tree that has been infested, you could spray a barrier insecticide treatment on the bark. One of the products is permethrin. Permethrin is the active ingredient in a number of compounds, and you spray from the base about up to 6 to 8 feet. And so when the female lays eggs and the eggs hatch into larvae, that insecticide barrier will kill the larvae before they move into the tree. Once they're in the tree or bush, then it's pretty much too late to do anything at that point.
So if you're going to use that treatment, you want to administer it fairly rapidly, it would sound.
Right. Probably early April would be what I would probably think of the timing, yeah.
All right, which we're upon. And we do want to remind folks, because we will be getting into the growing season full tilt quite soon here, that K-State Research and Extension does have that bevy of information available to gardeners, to homeowners managing their landscapes, that they can turn to throughout the season on these insects we speak of and more.
Yes, we do, Eric. We will be kicking off our newsletter, which is available online. If you don't get it, you can call our office, talk to Sharon Schroll. She'll get you on the list, and that provides up-to-date information on what people can expect in the home, yard, garden, and also in field crop situations. We also have a number of good fact sheets, extension publications that are available online that people can get access to, and they're written for the layperson to obtain information and help them deal with them in the gardens, yes.
I want you folks to be aware of that wealth of resources that Extension Entomology makes available, and the starting point, as easy as any, would be entomology.ksu.edu, and click on the Extension tab right there. So, Raymond, we're looking forward to getting together with you on a regular basis here in the weeks and months ahead, as, without question, insects will be after it very soon once more in lawn and garden. Thanks for now.
No problem, Eric. I look forward to a fruitful 2019 season and providing accurate information to help people deal with the insects and mites in horticultural cropping systems.
Appreciate it. Raymond Cloyd, horticultural entomologist, K-State Research and Extension, with us on this week's Horticulture segment, which caps off our Thursday edition. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be right back here this same time tomorrow. Hope you'll rejoin us then. Meantime, Eric Atkinson here, bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.